Just imagine I got $1 million for cheating without expecting it, and my life took a bad turn for me. It started as a joke, or at least that's what I told myself. We were at a charity gala, dressed in our finest, sipping overpriced champagne, surrounded by people who measured success in dollar signs. My husband was working the room, laughing with business partners, shaking hands, completely unaware of the man standing too close to me at the bar. He was older, powerful, the kind of man who didn't hear the word no often. His voice was smooth, his confidence intoxicating. We talked harmless flirtation, nothing serious. Then with a smirk, he leaned in and whispered, "Would you spend the night with me for $1 million?" I laughed. It was absurd, ridiculous. A movie plot, not real life, but he didn't laugh. He pulled out a business card, scribbled a number on the back, and slid it across the bar. Think about it. I should have torn it up, I should have walked away, but I didn't. That night, lying beside my husband, I stared at the card on my nightstand, the number taunting me. $1 million, more than we had in savings, more than my husband's business had made in years, enough to change everything. I told myself it wasn't about the money. That wasn't why my hands shook when I picked up my phone. That wasn't why I sent the message. One night, $1 million, no one had to know.
By the way, if you're curious about what happened next, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Thank you.
I was wrong. The next morning, I woke up expecting to feel different. I thought there would be relief, maybe even excitement, but all I felt was the weight of what I had done. The money was real. Sitting in an account I had never expected to see, a number that made my heart pound. And yet, instead of victory, there was only a hollow ache in my chest. I went through the motions, pretending everything was normal. My husband kissed my cheek before leaving for work, completely unaware. I smiled, nodded at the right times, played my role perfectly. But the unease never left me. The air felt heavier. Every glance from him felt like a test. Did he know? Could he sense it? Had something in me changed so drastically that I was no longer the woman he thought he knew? Then came the first message, not from my husband, from him. Was it worth it? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't even know what he wanted from me now. The transaction was complete, the deal done, but something about the message sent a chill down my spine. I deleted it, blocked the number, told myself it was over. But I should have known nothing comes without consequences. I tried to pretend life was the same. That morning, I went about my routine as if I hadn't crossed a line I could never uncross. But something had shifted, and I felt it in every small moment. How my husband's smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore, how his touch felt different, how my own reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar. I convinced myself that if I buried it deep enough, it would disappear, that I could forget, move on, and let the secret dissolve into the background of our lives. But secrets don't fade, they fester. The messages didn't stop. I had blocked his number, but new ones kept appearing from different lines. Some were simple, "I hope you're enjoying your money." Others were more direct, "We should talk." I ignored them all. But then one message changed everything. "Does your husband know?" I dropped my phone, my hands shaking. He couldn't, I had been careful, I had erased every trace. But paranoia is a funny thing, it plants seeds of doubt, whispers in your ear when everything should be quiet. That evening, my husband came home later than usual. He didn't kiss my cheek, he didn't ask how my day was. He sat at the dinner table, staring at his plate, barely touching his food. I watched him, my heart pounding, waiting for the moment when he would look up and ask the question I had been dreading. But he didn't. Instead, he stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "I need some air." I forced a smile. "Everything okay?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time in our marriage, I couldn't read them. Should it be? The breath caught in my throat. He knew something. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to sense that something was off. My chest tightened as he walked out the door, and suddenly I realized what fear truly felt like. Because I wasn't afraid of losing the money, I was afraid of losing everything else. The next morning, I woke up to find my husband's side of the bed empty. The sheets were still tucked in, untouched. He hadn't come home last night. Panic set in immediately. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, hesitating before calling him. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Maybe he just needed space, maybe he stayed at a friend's place. But deep down, I knew this was different. I finally dialed his number, my pulse pounding in my ears. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. By the time the afternoon rolled around, the dread in my stomach had turned into full-blown fear. He was never the type to disappear. He always came home, always. Then a message appeared on my phone. For a moment, I hoped it was him, but when I saw the number, my heart sank. "Meet me, we need to talk." It was him, the man who had set this all into motion, the one who had turned my life into a slow-burning disaster. I told myself to ignore it, to pretend like he didn't exist. but the fear of what he might do, of what he might already have done, was stronger. So I went. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. He was already sitting there looking as calm as ever, stirring his coffee like this was just another business transaction. When he saw me, he smiled. I was wondering when you'd show up. I sat down, my hands curled into fists on my lap. Where is he? Did you do something? His smirk didn't fade. Relax, he's fine for now, but he's asking questions, isn't he? You should have told him yourself. My stomach twisted. Why are you doing this? What do you want? He leaned in slightly, his expression unreadable. I already got what I wanted. The real question is, what are you going to do now? I exhaled shakily, feeling the walls close in around me. There was no undoing this. No amount of pretending or burying the truth would make it disappear. My husband knew something, and the man sitting across from me, he wasn't going to let me forget it. For the first time, I realized that the real cost of this deal wasn't $1 million. It was my entire life. The weight of my choices pressed down on me as I left the cafe, my breath shallow, my pulse erratic. The city streets blurred as I walked, my thoughts racing. Where was my husband? What did he know? And why did I feel like the walls were closing in faster than I could run? That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, flinching at every sound outside. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent, refusing to give me answers. When morning came, I forced myself through my routine, pretending as if I wasn't unraveling from the inside out, but by noon, my phone buzzed. We need to talk. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was my husband. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, thinking of every possible way this conversation could go. Maybe he only suspected. Maybe he didn't know everything. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out of this. But when I finally pulled into the driveway and saw his car parked outside, I knew better. He was waiting in the living room, his face unreadable, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. The silence stretched between us as I shut the door behind me, my pulse hammering in my ears. Where were you? His voice was calm, too calm. I swallowed hard. I needed to clear my head. He nodded slowly, then exhaled through his nose. You know, I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about trust, about the things we don't say out loud. My stomach twisted. What are you trying to say? He looked up then, and the exhaustion in his eyes made my breath hitch. I know. The world tilted beneath me. Know what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and set it on the table between us. The screen was unlocked, a message thread open. My blood turned to ice as I read the name. It was him, the man from the cafe, the man who had made the offer. You should have told me, my husband said quietly. Instead, I had to hear it from him. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened, my body locked in place. I had spent so much time fearing this moment, but I hadn't prepared for how it would actually feel. Why? His voice broke. Why would you do this? Tears burned in my eyes, but no words came, because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't destroy us even more than I already had. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The truth was no longer mine to control. The silence between us was unbearable. My husband sat still, his fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles were white. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything that would make this hurt less, but there were no words that could fix what I had done. He let out a shaky breath. Did you ever think about me, about what this would do to us, or was it just about the money? I flinched. It wasn't about the money. His laugh was hollow, bitter. Then what was it about? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because how could I explain something I didn't even fully understand myself? That it had started as curiosity, as temptation, as something that didn't feel real until it was too late, that I had convinced myself it was harmless because I thought no one would ever know. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, running a hand through his hair. You let him put a price on our marriage, on me? Do you even realize what you've done? Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I know I ruined everything, but I never stopped loving you. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. You don't do this to someone you love. The words hit harder than I expected. My whole body felt heavy, like I was sinking, like there was no ground beneath me anymore. Is there any way to fix this? He shook his head slowly, his eyes filled with something I couldn't bear to name. I don't think so. The finality in his voice shattered me. I had prepared for anger, for yelling, for anything but this, a quiet, exhausted resignation, a man who had already made his decision. He grabbed his keys from the table, looking at me one last time. I need space, I need time, and I don't know if I'm coming back. And just like that, he was gone. The door shut softly behind him, no slamming, no dramatic exit, just an ending. I stood there in the empty house, listening to the silence I had created, feeling the weight of $1 million that had cost me everything. And for the first time, I wished I could give it all back. The days after he left felt unreal, like I was floating through a life that no longer belonged to me. I moved through the house like a ghost, every room a reminder of what I had lost. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. His jacket hung by the door. His scent lingered on the sheets of our bed, a cruel reminder of what used to be. I thought about calling him, but what would I say? That I regretted everything? That I hated myself for what I had done? He already knew that. And even if he didn't, what difference would it make? Some things couldn't be undone. Then on the fourth day, a message appeared on my phone. My breath caught as I saw his name. We need to talk. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. I had spent nights imagining this moment, rehearsing apologies, preparing myself for every possible outcome. But now that it was happening, I wasn't ready. Would I ever be? We met at a park near our house, a place we used to go when life felt too heavy. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, staring out at the water. He looked different, tired, like he had aged in just a few days. I sat beside him, keeping a careful distance. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, then finally he spoke. I don't know what to do with this, with us. I swallowed hard. I don't either. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I loved you, I still do, but every time I look at you, all I can think about is that night, the choice you made, and I don't know if I can ever move past it. Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to hold them back. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I hate myself for what I did, that if I could take it back, I would. He turned to look at me then, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger in his eyes. Pain, grief, the remnants of love that hadn't fully died yet. Maybe one day, he said quietly, maybe, but not now. My chest ached, but I nodded. This wasn't a second chance, it wasn't even hope, but it was something, a thread, fragile and thin, but real. As I watched him walk away, I realized I didn't know what came next. I had spent so long being consumed by guilt, by regret, by the weight of my own betrayal. Now, for the first time, I had to figure out who I was without him. And maybe, just maybe, that was where my story really began. The days after he left felt unreal, like I was floating through a life that no longer belonged to me. I moved through the house like a ghost, every room a reminder of what I had lost. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. His jacket hung by the door. His scent lingered on the sheets of our bed, a cruel reminder of what used to be. I thought about calling him, but what would I say? That I regretted everything? That I hated myself for what I had done? He already knew that. And even if he didn't, what difference would it make? Some things couldn't be undone. Then on the fourth day, a message appeared on my phone. My breath caught as I saw his name. We need to talk. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. I had spent nights imagining this moment, rehearsing apologies, preparing myself for every possible outcome. But now that it was happening, I wasn't ready. Would I ever be? We met at a park near our house, a place we used to go when life felt too heavy. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, staring out at the water. He looked different, tired, like he had aged in just a few days. I sat beside him, keeping a careful distance. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, then finally he spoke. I don't know what to do with this, with us. I swallowed hard. I don't either. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I loved you, I still do, but every time I look at you, all I can think about is that night, the choice you made, and I don't know if I can ever move past it. Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to hold them back. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I hate myself for what I did, that if I could take it back, I would. He turned to look at me then, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger in his eyes. Pain, grief, the remnants of love that hadn't fully died yet. Maybe one day, he said quietly, maybe, but not now. My chest ached, but I nodded. This wasn't a second chance, it wasn't even hope, but it was something, a thread, fragile and thin, but real. As I watched him walk away, I realized I didn't know what came next. I had spent so long being consumed by guilt, by regret, by the weight of my own betrayal. Now, for the first time, I had to figure out who I was without him. Months passed, the pain dulled, but it never fully disappeared. I focused on rebuilding myself, on understanding why I had made the choices I did. Therapy, long walks, moments of solitude that forced me to confront the woman I had become. The money sat untouched in a separate account, a cruel reminder of the price I had paid. I didn't spend a cent of it, I didn't know if I ever would. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, I received another message. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I wanted you to know I don't hate you anymore. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move forward, even if the past would always be a part of me.
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.